What's going on, everyone? Jonathan here with the Venue RX podcast, and kind of fun. Today's guest and I have something in common, except she took it a lot further. I actually, for a while, wanted to be an accountant, and I thought it'd be so cool to work for some of the big accounting firms. And as I started researching this guest, I found out that she did work for Deloitte. Now, thankfully, we both, I think, have moved away from this.
Yes.
But I'm excited to have Michelle Loretta from B-Sage Consulting on the podcast today. Michelle, thank you for making time for this.
Thank you so much for having me, Jonathan. This is really fun chatting with you.
Well, this is going to be fantastic. We've got a lot of amazing topics lined up for everyone today. But just before we get into that, I love a good origin story. I know so many people do, and that's kind of a great way to start a podcast for anyone who doesn't know you. So can you kind of walk us through specifically how you got into the wedding and events industry? Because that always fascinates me, just how people get into this industry.
Yeah, I know, right? Because there's no linear path. You don't go to college. I mean, these days, actually, there are more hospitality degrees. I'm envious of people going through college these days. So yeah, I studied accounting in college. That's where I got my degree from USC in Southern California. And I went to go work for Deloitte. And I always say, like, that was the best foundation to learn the ins and outs of business. Because if you can read a business's finances, you can know anything about their business, right? They may tell you, like, oh, we're so good with our employees, we're the best. And then you go into their financials and you see, like, well, actually, they don't have any benefits. They don't, pay for time off. They don't have retirement plans, right? So the numbers never lie. But I was young and restless and I wanted to get out. And first I went into sales and marketing. I worked for a company that imported children's clothing from Europe. Paper was something I always loved. I loved stationery. And so I just kind of started fiddling in 2003, 2004, making stationery, making wedding invites for friends of friends. And honestly, I just kind of got a wild hair up my butt and decided to start a stationery business, a wedding stationery business. I had no training in design. I was, just writing text on Word documents and things like that. But I learned how to design. And at that time, it was all about, embellishments and things like that, which is really funny to think about right now, where now design is so much more graphically oriented. But in the mid 2004, it was pockets and layers and ribbons and things like that. So I always say I was at the right place at the right time to start a stationery business in 2004. And that's how I got into the industry, and gosh, what an amazing industry. Like I love being in this industry. So now it's been almost 17 years. And then in 2009, I started writing a business blog for the industry based on the idea of, there wasn't a lot of people teaching about the business side of weddings and events. This was in 2009. There were only maybe two or three of us, right? And so I thought, God, there's so many great lessons that I learned in my past experience with accounting, with finances, with sales, with marketing, and why not incorporate some of those strategies into our industry to have stronger businesses? And so that's what I started doing. I started writing a blog with the intention of connecting with people nationwide, thinking, well, I'll give free business advice and people will then buy or connect with me and refer wedding invite business to me. Like that was the idea, was to get more wedding invitation business with a national market. At that time, I was based in Seattle. It ended up evolving into its own consultancy, which today is known as B-Sage Consulting. And we just celebrated 12 years. So
Wow.
you never know where you're going to land when you decide to maybe get a degree or start a path in accounting and finance, which is what I spend a lot of time doing these days, is doing a lot of financial strategy and business planning for wedding and event business owners.
Totally. I love that.
Yeah.
And that's a really powerful topic for wedding business owners specifically, because we are such a creative bunch.
Yeah.
And like you said, the numbers do never lie. And you can say we have the best people and all of that. But yeah, you're totally right. If there are no benefits, if there are no, if it's not a real company, and I kind of struggle saying that, because you can very much have a real company. You can very much work for yourself and be a solopreneur.
Yes.
I think it all depends on what you want, right? Out of your business.
Yeah, Completely.
But
Nobody starts a business in the events industry to be like a gazillionaire. Like it's just not, if you really wanted to go like on that millionaire, billionaire track, you would start a technology company, right? So
mhm,
there's other reasons that we start businesses in this industry. And yes, you can have a profitable business and a lucrative business, but chances are it's to feed an artistic passion. It's typically also to create some sort of like personal balance at times, right? To be able to control your career choices and your family choices and things like that. And so there's much more of a draw that's not just financial.
totally. Michelle, I'm going to kind of throw you a little bit of a curveball question here
Yeah.
because you brought up, if you want to be a millionaire, a gazillionaire, the tech space is better. Do you think it's possible in this industry to really make a ton of money, like 7 figures, 8 figures, 9 figures? And if so, what type of role would that be? I mean, are we just talking venues? Are we talking
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
catering? Are we
Yeah.
talking
Which
multiple
segments?
locations? Yeah. What's your take on
So
that?
the businesses can make 7 8 figures. I have clients that are 7 8 figure businesses, but generally like the owners are not netting millions of dollars. Like an owner that is doing pretty well in this industry can be maybe making 100,000. Like I do see that, from time to time. I'm gonna preface it by saying that's still unusual. Like, to see business owners that are what's called owner's benefit. They may have a salary and a draw. An owner in this industry pulling 100 to 200,000, that's highly unusual. It does happen. Now their business may be doing $1 million, right? But they also have staff and they have, they have business expenses, right?
Mhm.
So the business can do that, but it's unusual that business owners netting $1 million. No.
Got it. And why do you think that is? Is it just because of the scale of the business? Like typically people spend all their time with one catering company in one area, or
Yeah, it's the nature of service-based businesses, right? So we're selling hours, we're trading hours for dollars, right? And there's only so much that our businesses can do in like hours for dollars at the end of the day. And I tend to see the businesses or the business owners that are earning netting, when I'm saying like their take home is more than $100,000, it's usually they are selling at a high price point, right? So their target market is like in the top 2%. So they're doing what's called luxury, and oftentimes it's celebrity wedding planners and things like that. And so they're working with bigger price points. They're typically in markets where people have more to spend, Southern California, New York, Miami, maybe a little bit, maybe a little of Chicago too, but that's it. And so you have these higher price points. So that's one thing. um, uh, the event companies that tend to, see those higher profits, they're larger scale production companies a lot of times. So they're managing multiple pieces. So they're not just a wedding florist. They're not just a wedding planner. They're getting a big piece of that budget, right? So if it's $1 million event and they're managing really what's called full scale production, not just planning and design, and right, like they're managing all the production. And yes, there's entertainment and things like that, but they are taking a big chunk of that event budget at the end of the day. So
totally.
the bigger scale production companies tend to see way bigger sales numbers year after year after year. All that being said, are the owners really netting, taking home $1 million? Probably not,
Mm,
maybe large scale event companies, but in weddings, not as much. No.
totally. Okay. So then speaking, of course, we're the Venue RX here, so we have to give a nod to our
Yeah.
venue owners.
Yeah,
Are
I love
our
the
venue
venues.
owners, are they making, and we have to have, and my goal is to get, a lot more venue owners
Yeah,
on here as well to just kind of interview them. But,
yeah,
in your perspective, they might, like you said, be netting, I'm sorry, maybe grossing
yeah. Oh,
six, seven, eight
yes,
hundred
yes,
thousand, maybe a million,
yes,
maybe 1.2, but then
yes.
there are salaries, there's managers, there's
Uh-huh.
okay,
Yeah,
totally.
and you asked me too, which segments tend to do better, or the owners do better. I think venues have the potential. Again, it depends on, like, what are they able to charge for venue fees, right? So if your venue is, targets a more moderate client, it is harder to see those bigger. But I see more of like the specialized venues that can charge, $10,000, venue fees. You can see stronger budgets. So I think venues, rental companies too, because rental companies can do a lot of volume. And if you
Mhm.
kind of figure out the operations balance with the financial balance with rentals, you can do pretty well with rentals as well. Now, both venues and rentals, they have a lot more overhead than like a planner, for example. So there's that added obligation, and they also have a lot of times they have financing, right? Like if you own your venue, you're going to have a loan or a mortgage or something like that that you're on the hook for. So the business may be highly profitable, but you have that loan obligation that maybe a true service business like an event planner doesn't have, that kind of financing that it's indebted to. Rentals companies also usually have a lot of financing that they're paying down.
Got it. Yeah,
Yeah.
that makes total sense. And
Yeah.
I think that's why owning a venue is both pretty exciting and it's kind of
Mhm.
scary, because if you don't finance it correctly, if you don't get it set up
Yes.
financially, and this is with any business, but I think
Totally. Yes.
with venues, if you're taking on that high overhead, if you're, you have an SBA loan, or if you
Mhm.
have some other sort of loan where you have 300 or $500,000 out and you don't structure that correctly,
Yes.
you could end up in trouble if you had a couple of
Yes.
bad years.
Yeah, and here's the thing. You could be the business could have, I don't know, a couple $100,000 in earnings every year, right? But all of that $200,000 could be going towards that loan.
Yeah.
Again, depending on what the financing arrangement is, or what the loan pay terms are, or interest terms, like you could be paying that off, all you could, your earnings could be tied up in that cash outflow of satisfying your debt. Yeah.
Got it. Makes
Yeah.
total sense. Well, I think this is a perfect segue into what I'm excited to talk about today, which is kind of the first three people, or what you're terming a perfect trifecta.
Yeah.
These key people who are in your organization. We're obviously talking about how you set things up is super important,
Yeah.
and that very much rolls into who you have working for you, systems that you have in place, things
Yeah.
like that.
Yeah.
So let's launch right into that. Who are these three people? And of course,
So
then
yeah.
where do we find them? That's the question after that, right?
Well, it's like three classifications of people in terms of skill and mindset is what you want to be thinking about, and it really depends on the type of business, right? So, um, a wedding planning business or an event planning business, they may not have these three people. The owner likely takes on these three people for the first 5 years until they hire, right? A
Mhm.
venue, and also rental companies and catering companies, you do tend to see um, these three classifications of these three types of people represented. And so, what you want to be thinking about are, and this comes from Michael Gerber's EMyth Revisited, which is a book that every business owner should read. I'm sure you've read it, Jonathan. Have you read it? Yeah.
Yes.
And so the premise lies on what he teaches, that as a business or as an entrepreneur, we start our businesses thinking like, oh, we're going to start these businesses. Really, we're starting businesses because we're artists. And so we are inserting ourselves in what he calls the technician role. I call it the worker bee role in our industry, where it's like, I want to make wedding invites. I'm going to start a wedding invite business. And all of a sudden I am like an invite producer. I am an assembly line worker, and there's nothing glamorous about the business that I've started. And so if you're a florist, you are making 1,000 arrangements. And if you are a wedding planner, you are schlepping, wedding dresses, and like you are the worker bee. And that's your first person. That's what you hire yourself. You can call yourself an entrepreneur, but at the end of the day, you are a worker bee, or as Michael Gerber calls it, you are a technician. You are doing your craft, and that's that. At some point in your business, you start to realize like, well, I can't be the only worker bee. I need to hire another worker bee, and maybe I need to hire a few. And for venues, you get to this point real fast because nobody can run a venue single-handedly, right? So
For sure.
you may hire someone to help you with sales, or you may hire some staff to kind of help you run the house on the night of events and things like that. And those are usually your first workers. And so you've got maybe, 3 or 4 worker bees. You're likely still the worker bee initially. Eventually you get to a point where you have like 3 or 4 worker bees, and all of a sudden somebody's got to be the manager. And as the owner of the business, you put yourself in the manager role. And so that's the second person in that trifecta that you need to have, is the manager. And so now the manager is supervising the worker bees, right? Because somebody needs to be in charge. Like somebody needs to be training, somebody needs to be overseeing, creating systems, guiding, mentoring, right? Scheduling, right? Like who's on what shift doing what event, right? And so you have a manager. As an owner of the business in the wedding industry, what I tend to see most people top out at is that manager role. Okay. So you may have a very successful business where people are looking at you and like, wow, you have 10 planners under you. That's amazing, right? And that is absolutely amazing. But you've become a manager. You're not yet at that third place, which is an ideal situation to be in, where you have this third person in a role, which is essentially what Michael Gerber calls the true entrepreneur. I like to call the executive, like your chief executive staff, your CEO. And as a business owner, ideally you want to get to that point where you are a CEO of your company and you're able to make visionary choices for your business, where you're not trapped in being worker bee, where you're having to execute 100 events by yourself single-handedly every year, where you're not just trapped in managing people all the time. Likely at that point, hopefully you've been able to hire a manager to be your manager. And so for the venue, you'd have like an event manager, or if you were a catering, you may have a front of house manager and a back of house manager. If you are a rental company, you may have an event manager, you may have a warehouse manager, right? But you have people that are overseeing your team. And so now as the CEO of your business, you're able to actually think about strategic things all the time, and or maybe 80% of the time, because there's still management, right? You're still managing managers and overseeing and doing human resource type things, and you're
Yep.
overseeing finances and things like that. But you get to spend a lot more time on visionary responsibilities, growth, expansion, a lot of business development, right? So let's say that your business has been completely focused on weddings and you want to expand into corporate. Now you have the ability to say like, okay, I'm going to develop this corporate side of our business. Like, what does that look like, right? And so you have the space to do that. So that's an ideal team, this trifecta of worker bee, manager, and a chief executive, a CEO. Like I said, not everybody has the ability to have all those people. Your business model may not make sense to have all those people. Like I said, wedding planners typically, it's very difficult because there's just not enough volume to support so many people and so many layers. The CEO and the manager are the owner and they're the same person. That's fine. But I think it's important to make the distinction that regardless of how many people are holding these roles need to be honored, right? Even if it's just you and it's your first year of business, you're the worker bee, you're the manager, and you're the CEO, like make sure that you're giving yourself time to be visionary and thinking about long-term business development and growth, right?
Totally.
So that's the trifecta.
I well, I love it. That was super, super powerful. And I feel like because of our creative nature in this industry, we often just start doing because we got to
Yes.
do what's in front of us and we're doing what we
Yeah.
love. And there's nothing wrong with that, but you're right, like actually taking that, like thinking, listening
Yeah.
to you, right?
Yeah.
Listening to other people, educators in this industry, in this space who have that vision and have that oversight and can kind of say, okay, I need to put on my executive hat. I need to put
Uh-huh.
on my
Uh-huh.
worker bee hat. I need to work on managing any worker bees that
Yes.
I'm bringing on board and
Yes.
itemizing those. Michelle, something interesting that kind of came to me while you were saying that is, I think in this wedding industry, and especially with everything that happened in the pandemic and everything, right? There is this pressure that I think, and this is why there's probably been a rise of consulting. As business owners, we want to do better. Like we
Mhm.
want to make more money, right? We don't always want to be stuck to our businesses working 60 to 80 hours a week and
Yeah.
feel like we're constantly drowning. So there is this level of like this idea of success, which is making six figures or making seven figures. But at the same time, for a lot of people, they really, that starts pulling them away from doing what they really love, right?
Mhm.
Because maybe they
Yeah.
do love, like there's some joy associated
Yes.
with.
Yes. Yes.
So
And not everyone's solution is to have these 3 people, right? Some people I feel in our industry, some people are true artists and they're going to be in that worker bee role, and it's fine. I think acknowledging that that's where you want to be, that you don't ever want to leave the flowers, and you want to be able to do that, and you don't plan on hiring a huge team. Maybe you just want to be you and a couple assistants. That's completely fine. And in fact, sometimes I see those smaller scale businesses have much more success financially than companies that are managing so many people, because adding sales volume doesn't always necessarily translate to adding earnings.
that's so true. That's so
Yeah.
true. Well, I think that's an important discussion that we as an industry need to have, and it
Hmm.
needs to be
Hmm.
okay. Like if
Hmm.
someone is working they do actually want to wear all the hats,
Yeah.
that there's no
It's fine.
looking down
I
on
wear all
that.
the hats in my business. I've tried the other way. I like running everything myself, you know?
Yeah.
I'm totally okay with that. I'm
Eh,
not looking to grow an empire and do everything. I love being the service provider. I love being able to be one-on-one working with my clients, right? And a lot of wedding producers feel the same way, right?
mhm.
I think it's important to have that discussion, because I think a lot of times people are like, "Oh, that wedding planner has 10 planners and they must be doing really well." I'm like, no, that's not always the case. A lot of
Yeah.
times it's the smaller businesses that are doing much better than the people that have a lot of staff.
Mhm. And some
Yeah.
people though, to that side of the aisle, they are the aisle, pardon the pun. Look at me with my dad jokes, you know. But they are, they may want to run a business. Like I personally, I like
Yeah.
the business side of it. I am
Yeah. Yeah.
creative, but I'm creative with like, I love the people side of things. I want to
Yeah.
build a big business just for the joy of running a big organization.
Yeah.
Don't give me flowers, don't give me stationery, don't give me a
Yeah. Yeah.
pencil. You know what I mean? Like I am I am less like, my creativity is played out in a little different way. So
Yeah.
that's a really cool insight. I think a
Do
lot
you
of
like do you like managing and mentoring people?
love.
Okay, so you probably fall way more into like um a manager role. Like people's personalities tend to be, one of the three. It doesn't mean that people can't cross over, but there's something that they just naturally connect with. And if you love mentoring and overseeing and helping people and directing them, you likely have strong manager tendencies than the worker bee or even the CEO tendencies. And that doesn't mean that you don't dabble in those other things, but you probably have strong management tendencies that outride the other ones.
Totally. I love that you brought up
Yeah.
the E-Myth, and that is an incredible book. E-Myth and E-Myth
Yeah.
Revisited.
Yeah.
Um, but there is Rocket Fuel by Gino Wickman
Uh-huh.
and Mark Winters. And they
Yeah.
talk about the integrator, the visionary,
Uh-huh.
and they don't
Exactly.
really talk about the technician, because the
Yeah.
technician again is more covered in the E-Myth.
Uh-huh.
But yeah, that I think understanding those categories for business
Yeah.
owners is super important, just because you are aware then and you're understanding why you're doing it. So when it becomes
Yeah.
tough, you know
Yeah.
why you're there.
Yeah. Well, and that's why a lot of times people need to think about, so for example, if you have technician tendencies or manager tendencies and you struggle with the visionary aspects of your business, like you have a really hard time with the strategic pieces, that's where like hiring a coach can be really helpful. And they end up taking on that CEO or CFO type role. Um, and so again, like you said, recognizing maybe the limitations of your skills or your desires, right? Like not everybody wants to do that. Some people want to stay with the flowers. Working with other people that have those strengths, like a coach, if you're not visionary, can really help satisfy that CEO role in somebody else. And let's say like you're really strong in management. Like it may be that you have gotten to a point like, I don't want to be the worker bee. A lot of my wedding planner clients, like, I don't want to be the worker bee. They've been in business for 10 years. I need to have worker bees under me because the 20 hours of events on the weekends is too much. And that's where you realize I do have to have staff that can come in and do that, right? So recognizing where to find people, even if it's not like a permanent position, you can have people satisfy some of those other roles in other ways.
So does B-Stage Consulting then help business owners, kind of like your model that you just mentioned, that
Yeah.
10-year wedding planner that's like, okay, I know, I'm an expert in my market, but it's just me doing this. Now I need to have those worker bees under me.
Yeah.
You kind of help them make that transition to really
Yes.
scaling
Yes.
their company.
Yes. And yes, that's exactly what I do. And a lot of times that conversation, so if someone has been a worker bee and they have enjoyed the worker bee role and they know that they need to get into the manager role, or they already have stuff and they need to get out of the weeds, like that's what we talk a lot about, is like getting out of the weeds. One of the first steps is defining that business owner's job description. And so what they've done is they have job descriptions for everyone in their company, because they've hired an associate planner, they've hired a lead planner, they've hired, an office manager, right? And so they have the job descriptions for everybody. I was like, well, where's your job description? It's like, oh, I need a job. Yes, you need to know what you've been doing, or you need to know what your new job is. Because what ends up happening is if you don't define what your role is, you're going to all of a sudden go back to worker B. And A, it's what you know. B, it's comfortable. C, you start to feel very insecure that your staff is doing the work and you're not doing the same kind of work, right?
Yeah.
Because you're still going to be working, but it's not the same kind of work. So I see a lot of like guilt that comes from becoming a manager. Or sometimes I've worked with companies that they feel a lot of guilt because they have managers and they don't know what it means to be a CEO, and they feel very guilty about it because they're like, I feel like I'm sitting around all the time. It's like, you're not sitting around. You need a job description so that you understand what you need to be working on, right?
Mhm.
And um
We've
and then
struggled
all
with
of a
that.
sudden it changes things when they start to kind of really see like, oh, okay, I have a different job now, I've been promoted. What does that promotion look like?
Totally. Yeah,
Yeah.
we've struggled with that. We had a staffing company for a while that was actually just acquired, and there was a struggle as we brought on more people to kind of, and it was my wife and I, our
Yeah.
roles would change, and I handled it a little better than she did. But she, like, if we even talked about hiring someone who would take off of a portion of her workload, it would kind of be like, well, why do we need them? Because I'm doing it.
Yes.
And then it did always feel like we were in the weeds. And but there was this overarching sense of like, if I give this up,
Uh-huh.
what am I going to do?
What do I
It's,
do?
yeah, like,
What do I do with my time?
yeah. And the crazy thing is, I always said, like, I didn't have a great answer for it, but I was like, let's let that happen. Let's let that happen for a week or two.
Yeah.
And I guarantee that there is plenty to do that we're just not seeing. I love what you said though about giving yourself that job description, because even a business owner who does define other roles,
Yeah.
what ends up, why they probably feel like they're in the weeds, is because they end up doing everything else
Yes. Yes.
and it's not
Yes.
defined. And so they just shifted responsibilities around a little bit. They're still
Completely.
struggling.
Completely. I've seen floral businesses that when they're not having to do floral production anymore, which is great, like, all right, we solved that problem. But all of a sudden they're like managing inventory all the time. They're like reorganizing the warehouse all the time. And it's like, no, you're like, we didn't basically take you out of floral so that you could be a warehouse manager. Like, we're trying, again, you're trying to, your goal is to expand the business into this other area. You need to have time to work on that expansion. Like, that's your job description, is opportunities and expansion and strategy and things like that, right? Business development, all of that. And so, yeah, they'll end up trading like, one weed for another weed. It's like, no, that's not what we want here.
Totally. I think we've set a really good framework and platform to talk about this next topic, which, we talked about kind of the true earning potential of some of these businesses
Yeah.
and why people in our industry go through it. And then we've talked a little bit about these three different placeholders, right?
Mhm.
These positions that every company needs. Can we talk about an overall kind of wireframe of how you would love to see, like, what does a perfectly executed business kind of look like? And I know that's an impossible task because our businesses are
Yeah.
so different. But
Yeah.
let's go from the beginning. Let's say that I want to become a floral designer, or I want to
Yeah.
become a planner. Where do I start? what do some of my job descriptions look like? Then what's the next phase? Hiring a couple of those people. Then what's
Yeah.
that third phase? And then ultimately, if my goal is some schedule freedom and maybe making that six-figure a year,
Yeah.
maybe two or $300,000 a year, which is at the top, right? We
Yeah.
kind of
Yeah.
talked about that.
Yeah.
What does that flow look like?
Yeah. So, you can't really plan out that flow without going back to basics. And I'm talking about a business plan.
Yep.
I know people are like, "Oh no, I've been fine." You see those articles in like Fortune. I've built my first business without a business plan. I was like, well, you didn't write it, but you knew exactly what you're doing in your business, right?
Yeah.
And the reason why that's so important in the start, but not just in the start, to be quite honest, I'd say a business plan is most effective in between year 2 and 5, to be quite honest, because that's kind of like that jump off period. Here's the reason why is because you can't build a business that's just operationally amazing with these job descriptions and these people in the right position without considering the financial pieces. And the financial pieces don't come into play without a marketing strategy. Like all those things have to play in together. And I tell people this when I create a financial plan for them is like, I can put numbers on a spreadsheet, but it doesn't mean anything without the pieces behind it, the marketing decisions and the operational decisions behind it, right? So if I have $1 million sales goal, well, that's great. That's a beautiful number on a cash flow plan. But I want to know, what's your marketing plan to get to $1 million? And if you are planning on doing, for that $1 million, you're planning on doing 100 events in a year. Okay, well, that's great. We can just talk about 100 events, but what does that look like in terms of your staffing, in terms of your operations, in terms of production? Like, how do those events actually happen, right? So, in creating that framework that you asked me for, you need to make sure that all three of those things play together in perfect harmony, and they're all underlined with a core philosophy, right? So this is what you do business for, what it is that you want to do for your community, your people, your clients, right? It's like the core values that are strongest within your business, right? That's the foundation. But those three things, marketing, operations, and finances, need to play together. So yes, you can say like, okay, I'm going to have these three people in my floral business. I know that I'm going to be the lead designer, and I'm going to have a couple assistants. And then by year 5, I'd like to have a manager, and they will then have 3 designers under them, and I'm going to be the CEO, and all of that is great and good. But how are you going to pay for them, right? So we get back to like, oh, now we need sales, and now we need a marketing plan to support those sales. And then at the end of the day, like financially, what does that look like to support all of those things, right? You can't make one decision in one area. You can't make a staffing decision without a financial and a marketing decision behind it, and vice versa, right? Like they're so tightly interwebbed. And I think that that's where a lot of business owners in their early years, they forget like how all of those are so tightly integrated. So
Mhm.
they may have such a big like social media strategy to get out the door, but they're not really thinking like, well, what is that actually going to do for the other parts of my business? A, being financially successful, and B, being able to staff the volume of events that I'm going to get from all of this wonderful marketing that I've been doing, right?
Mhm. And that's so true. Making sure that you're like, if you want 100 events a year and you need X amount of dollars from those events, yeah, if you add expenses because you're adding personnel, that you may not be making them. You might need, in your current model, you might
Yeah.
need 200 events to be able to get that
Yes.
$1 million role. And then you're
Yes.
going to realize, okay, I'm increasing my costs to do that, and I'm not
Mhm.
able. And do I really want to be running 200 events? And
Mhm.
yeah, absolutely. Okay, so that makes a lot of
And
sense.
then you get into pricing. I'm going to say that I know we're not even talking about pricing, but pricing is it's the thing. That's the tweet, right? Like pricing.
Yeah.
Right. Pricing is everything. I mean, pricing gives you the ability to be able to not do a million events a year and burn yourself out. Pricing is the secret ticket to making higher profits, making that $100,000 plus takeaway as a business owner. Pricing is what gives you enough margin to be able to staff appropriately, right? So a $10,000 fee allows you to staff, or cost of materials a lot more than a $2,000 fee, right?
Totally.
So yeah.
I have just a burning question that I've been
Yeah.
dying to ask. It's been on my mind for a little while now, just in not only with some of the guests that I've spoken with, but just as I've been in this industry in the last um 6 or 7 or 8 years, I go to these different networking meetings and different things. As I'm talking to pros, I feel like we're all looking for a certain type of client,
Mhm.
right? There's this talk of the ideal client. And that ideal client typically has a much larger budget than the actual client that many of us are dealing with, right?
Yes, 100%.
And so then I talk to these people and it's like, well, I'd love to work. I'm trying to work with clients, or I'm going to price myself so that I only work with clients who are going to afford this or whatever. But then there seems to be this gap between what the client is willing to pay because of the value that the client is assigning to, you know, XYZ amount of florals, or a 10 or 20 or $30,000 planner, or a $10,000 to $20,000 venue, or catering at a certain point. There just seems to be this resistance. So do
Yeah.
you think it's imaginary? Like this client that we're all
Yeah,
trying to
that's
build
such
in
a
our
good
heads?
question. So I do think that every market, depending on where you're at, tends to have its cap, right? Like
Okay.
in a general sense. Now, that's not saying, so for example, I once worked with a client in like I think it was like North Dakota. Like even though there's oil money up there, like just the way people spend, like there was a definite cap. Like she wasn't going to see the same budgets as weddings in LA. Like there was just no way, right? And I know a lot of people preach like you can make the market. And it's like I don't necessarily agree with that. Like you do have like geographic market limitations, right? All that being said, what I see in the industry is that most people, most vendors, most professionals are trying to um, satisfy the needs of the middle, right? And so and it may be a low middle, a middle middle, and a high middle, right? But most people are kind of gravitating in this middle market, which I think for like the Southern California would probably be somewhere 50 to 80,000 dollars as a budget, right? And depending on gas and things like that, it could even be 30. But I'd say around like 50 to 80 is where like a Southern California budget would fall in that like middle to middle high, right? But the problem is like the majority of the industry is trying to satisfy that, right? And so we're all competing for the same clients. And so under the example that you explained, yes, that's absolutely happening because we're all trying to go for that same client. But there's plenty of clients that are in the 100,000. It's not as many as in this, right? But you don't need 100 of these clients. You may just need like 10 of 100,000, right? And there's far few people competing for those bigger budgets. There's far fewer vendors nationwide that are trying to attract $100,000 wedding clients
Why do you think that is?
because it's safe to be in the middle. And there's two things. The mindset is if I appeal to everybody, I have an opportunity to get more business. But the reality is when you try to appeal to everybody, you're not appealing to anybody. You end up coming out kind of vanilla, right? And so that's where you see people's websites and they all kind of look the same. Like nobody's really making a statement because people are kind of like scared to say, like, you know what? I only do Persian weddings. I only do Persian weddings. That's all I do because that's my specialty. I only do Greek weddings or I only do Korean weddings. Like you rarely see people kind of make a stance to say that. But the reality is if you make a strong stance, I only do Persian weddings, chances are you may be the only one in your market doing Persian weddings. And you're going to get 100% of that business versus like, yeah, maybe there's 10 million clients over here, but you're also competing with 10 million vendors, And so, yeah, maybe there's only 100 Persian weddings to be had in your market, but you have a shot at getting almost all of them, right? Like,
Mm,
and so it happens with price points too, right? So I'm just going to pull numbers out of the air. Let's say in your market, there's a million vendors that are going for a million clients in that middle price point, right? So that allows you like each one wedding per person. Great, right? Now let's say in the bigger weddings, $100,000 plus, there's not a million active clients. Maybe there's only 1,000. But let's say only 10 of you guys are competing in that. Well, now you each have a chance to get 10 of them versus being in the lower market where it's one per one, right? And so everyone's kind of fighting in this middle price point. So yeah, there's only 1,000 weddings up here versus 1,000,000, but you're only compete, your competition is so slim up here in these high price points, right?
Hmm. That's really, really insightful. I feel like not too many people, I know I've been guilty of thinking that if I can
Yeah.
appeal to more people,
Yes.
I've got a greater shot.
Yes.
Like it's kind of the idea of like, if I fish in a lake with more fish in it,
Yes.
then I'm more likely just by simple law of numbers to get a fish. And that
Yeah, but
sounds
you know what?
logical.
You're in a lake with like 100 other fishermen
Exactly. Exactly.
versus being in like this tiny little pond with like not a lot of fish, but you're the only one there.
Totally. Okay. So say I'm listening to this right now. I'm a
Yeah.
venue owner. I'm
Yeah.
a florist. I'm a coordinator. I'm a planner. I'm whatever, right? And I'm like,
Yeah.
screw it. I heard Michelle
Yes.
say that, and I'm gonna be, and I heard her say it's comfortable, and I heard her say that, and so damn it, I'm gonna be, courageous, and I'm gonna go out and I'm gonna
Yeah.
just triple my price, and I'm gonna go after the 10 or 100 Persian weddings in my area or whatever it
Yes.
is, right?
Yes.
And
Yes.
you're gonna make that bold statement. The whole
Yes.
website's going pink.
Yes.
The whole, like, whatever it is, right? And you're gonna really set yourself apart.
Yeah.
What do we have to do to actually make this work? Because you can't just triple your pricing and
No.
build it and
No.
they'll come. Because if they don't exist, they don't come,
Yeah, pricing
right?
is not a financial decision, it's a marketing decision, right? So you have to make sure that your market and your marketing and your branding matches that price point, right? So yeah, let's say my price is to work with $100,000 weddings plus, right?
Perfect.
What is it that you need to do within your marketing strategy to reflect the value that someone's going to get out of that price point, right? And so chances are, if you only have 2 years experience, it's going to be really hard to convince somebody that you're there yet. Okay. That you are worth paying. And listen, I am all for everyone's worth it. Everyone's worth the price. But I hate that kind of talk. That's not real in my opinion. That's not how it works. The market tells you what you're priced, whether you have money mindset or not. Money mindset only goes so far as the market actually tells you what they're willing to pay for you, right? So
Michelle, I love that. And the other part about that is I believe that that translates to confidence. And I think
yes.
this is a totally different topic.
Yeah.
So let's not
Yeah.
even go
Yeah.
here, but I think that's what happens when you, like, I have 4 kids, right?
Yeah.
You can
Yeah.
tell a kid, like, I love you so much. You're so great. You can
Yeah.
affirm them. And I think as vendors in this industry, we can all affirm each other and get on clubhouse rooms and
Yeah.
build each other up and all of that. But at the end of the day, you're totally right. If we aren't being realistic, if we
Yeah.
aren't seeing wins, if
Yeah.
that child doesn't actually feel through our
Yeah.
actions that we do love them, or they don't feel like they actually objectively are
Yes.
succeeding, it's a
Yes.
fake form of confidence. It doesn't taste and feel as good.
Yes.
And you're right. We could all get hyped that we're all worth $100,000. And yes, you are, as an individual vendor, you're worth that.
Yes.
But you may not be getting paid that because you're not 2 + 2 doesn't equal
Yes.
7.
Completely.
It equals
Completely.
4.
Completely. And so like if you have 2 years experience, it's going to be hard to convince somebody that like they're going to pay you, the $100,000 price point or whatever.
Yeah.
So now if you have 2 years experience doing weddings, but you've got 20 years experience doing corporate and festival, like you have other experience that may translate to that higher price point, even if it's not directly under your business, right? So there's so many factors that go into experience. The other factors that go into pricing are so experience, expertise, right? So if you are really specialized in something like nobody else, right? Like if you know film photography and very few other people in your area know film photography the way you do, that's an expertise, right? Like that's a specialty. Rarity breeds value. And so if you have something rare about you or your business, that's going to dictate a higher price point. If you're the only one who does Persian weddings and you know all of the traditions and everything, that's going to all of a sudden you're the only person who knows all this stuff. That dictates a higher price point, right? So that's the value of not being vanilla. Don't be like everybody else because rarity breeds value. Other things that can communicate value and a higher price point, um, the relationships, right? The relationships that you have with other vendors. If other vendors vouch for you, that's another point, right? Like I almost kind of think like, okay, pricing strategy is like every little factor adds $1,000 to your fee, right? So you've got, 10 years experience. There's probably like $3,000 in a fee. People trust and want to work with you. You have a great reputation and you're a team person. There's another $2,000. Now we're at five. You've got 20 years corporate experience in addition to your business. There's another two. Now we're at seven, right? You're the only one who does Persian weddings or film photography in your area. There's another three. Now we're at $10,000 fee, right? So if you try to kind of like quantify some of those factors, ideally, that's what I would love to do. I'd love to come up with a formula where people can quantify those factors, but all of those factors add into somebody's value as a service provider.
Okay, that's so clear. And I think for anyone listening to this, this is a great reality check and kind of an objective place that you can sit, pencil and paper, and say, okay, what do I bring to the market?
Uh-huh.
Michelle, let's talk though for those people, and I think this is an exciting place to wrap up, because for a lot of people that are looking for education, I remember you saying on a number of different podcasts that I've listened to you be on, you maybe are even kind of jealous of new vendors in today's market, because there now is like education. And when you start in mid 2000s, like there's limited stuff. And now there are incredible companies like B-Sage Consulting and different companies that can provide value. So for the new folks that are coming into this industry, we just rolled off of a pandemic and all this stuff, but they're like, damn it, I'm going in, I'm going to be a florist, I'm going to be a planner, catering, whatever it is. How do they begin this journey? How do they shorten that cycle?
Yeah. Well, so I'm going to tell people to go to my website and download a quick and easy business plan that I have on there. It's on the homepage. You can find it at bsageconsulting.com.
Okay.
And to me, that's that first step, right? Like I always say, like the first business plan you write, like the days that you open your door, that's not the plan, but it forces you to kind of start thinking about some of these things you need to learn about. And like I said, between 2 to 5 years, that's the sweet spot for creating a business plan, because at that point, oh, I'm really good at this kind of wedding, or I really like doing this, or I really love working with small weddings, like intimate weddings that are only 50 people or less, right? Like that's going to be my secret sauce, right? So at that point, you're able to write a business plan a little bit better. And like I said earlier, I mean, really, it's the marriage of those three things coming together. Your marketing strategy needs to play with your operational plan, needs to talk to your finances, to your money, to make sure that all of those three things are working together for a truly successful business.
I love that. Well, Michelle, thank you so much for coming on today.
Yes, thanks for having me.
Tons of fun. I know you just plugged where to go, but when people want to find you, talk to you, hire you, ask you questions, whatever, where can they reach out to you online?
So on my website is bsageconsulting.com. And then on social media, you can find me at bsage always, BESAGE always.
I love it. Very cool. Well, everyone, that was Michelle Loretta. I'm really, really thankful for her coming on the show today. And we will put all of the show notes and links to all of the places that she is online in the description. If you're listening to this on podcast, definitely go and check out YouTube. And Michelle has a bunch of really exciting digital products also launching on her website. Ones that are currently available, correct? As well as some ones that are coming up in the fall?
I do. I have the action plan, which is our business planning workbook, toolbook that's available year round. And then the people plan is coming back this fall, winter. A lot of people have worked the people plan with me over the years, and it's been a couple years since we had a new launch of it. So it's going to come back this fall, winter 2021. I always forget what year we're in.
I know, right? Like we had a gap year that everyone's just.
Yeah, exactly. Time warp.
Well, now, and of course, there's now a hole in my heart because we didn't get to talk about people. And I love people. So
I know we barely talked about it with a triumvirate. Well, I'll come on some other time. We'll talk about more people even more.
We'll have to do it. Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Michelle. I appreciate it.